Please welcome Congressman Schweikert.
I'm a non-drinking Catholic. And so I built a compromise with a lot of my friends. My problem is, come to my office, we have our own cappuccino espresso machine. And if you've ever been around someone with an alcohol problem, you know how they often like to try to force and encourage others to engage in sort of bad acts of, well, in my office, come in, I'm going to try to caffeinate you. I stand in front of you actually in a way where I want to talk about something that a lot of politicians do really badly, and that's talk about life, you know, and the cause of life, because for many of us, we feel like we've been doing it forever, and for some of us, we have. I was born in an unwed mother's home in LA to a 17-year-old girl who this last Friday we held her funeral in the LA area. And so I have an interesting experience. I was adopted by a family that was on its way back to Arizona. And so even as a little kid, my parents were involved in the life movement because, you know, in 1972, Roe v. Wade, my mother grabbed up my siblings and myself, and in the early 70s, we're out there standing on street corners. And half the time I had no idea, you know, why I was there or why some person from the radio was sticking a mic in my face. And a lot of it wasn't until I got a bit older. And you start having, you know, we all go through sort of our crises of conscience where we're trying to understand our place in the world and what we are as God's gift. You know, God has given us this gift of life. But even if you're non-religious, what do you stand for? I mean, you know, one of my best friends is this raving atheist, and yet she is the most ravenous pro-life activist you're ever going to meet. And I know that seems crazy, but she's come to this weird conclusion that if you're going to stand for something, you stand for life. Because what else is there? What are we? So picture, I want to walk you through a personal story and then take 2 steps backwards. So picture this. I've been blessed. I got to grow up in Scottsdale. I have a really, actually, strange family. My family's actually nuts. I love them to death. You know, but I grew up in one of those households that believed it wasn't enough to go to church on Sunday. It wasn't enough to follow the covenants of your faith. If you weren't out in the street doing it, you were failing. So one of my mother's great passions for 25 years was going out and recruiting drug-addicted prostitutes and getting them into rehab. Gotta tell you, it made Thanksgiving dinner always really special. You've not lived till you've turned to your little sister and gone, Annie, who's the nice lady in spandex at the end of the table? Swear to it. But that's actually, so you need to understand, I sort of come from that world that, you know, our activism is more than being able to stand behind a podium and give a pretty speech. If you're not out there in the neighborhoods, in the street, carrying it out, you're failing. I got really lucky. I got elected to my legislature when I was 28 years old. I got to be the majority whip at age 30. I ran for Congress at 33, lost, was never going to do any of this again. Went back to a real life. And one day I walk into my office, I'm in my late 30s, and I turn on my computer, and there's this email from someone I have no idea who they are, saying, "Hi, David, hey, your little sister gave me some information about you. Here's your birth mom." Now, what are the rules? You know, do you pick up the phone and call? What if she hasn't told her husband and her 2 daughters? Do you have the right to inject yourself into someone's life after all those years? So we had a family meeting, and I'm blessed, as remember I mentioned my family was special. So we had a family meeting about this, saying, how do you do this? Because my little sister had met her birth parents a couple years earlier. And we came to a decision. I wrote this very carefully worded handwritten note, and sent it, and there was no response. A week went by. 2 weeks went by. And I figured, oh, I either got her in a lot of trouble or something horrible will happen. And all of a sudden I get this phone call. What is this about? Going, uh-oh, it's her husband. They're not happy. And I said, oh, no, so sorry. Maybe, actually, at that point, it was, I think 33 years ago, we probably shared something in common, da-da-da-da-da. Actually, it was 38 years. And he goes, hold on. And all of a sudden, this little voice picks up the phone, and she's just crying. She's saying, I prayed for you every morning. My heart is ripped out every March 3rd, which is your birthday. I think about you constantly. Have you had a good life? Have you been happy? What's your life been like? And I'm on the other side crying, saying, look, I've had a great life. I grew up with an amazing family. I've been well educated. I'm not calling for money. I actually can loan it to you. I've done pretty well. Which there's part of that story. My half-sister from California was saying that was one of the things when they were having their family meeting on their side is he contacting us because he wants money? I had more than they did. And this amazing discussion of, I'm just on the phone saying, I just wanted to call, say thank you. I've not only had a great life, I think I've been able to do some really neat things for my community and hopefully the world. And I hope I will continue to have the blessings to try to do that. And a week later, I drove to California, showed up at the door, and they had signs up all over, like they were announcing to the neighborhood saying, you know, our son, who we've never met, is showing up here to come visit us. And you know the dear Lord has an interesting sense of humor. After about an hour and a half of talking and crying, it felt like home. The next thing, you know what the real symbol of if you're comfortable at someone's house? You're rummaging through their refrigerator going, nah, you guys need a better brand of soda. And literally overnight, I have 2 half-sisters, which are like 6-foot-tall blondes. Don't ask how that happened. And it made Christmas really expensive because my family just doubled in size. But it's been an amazing experience. And you have these fascinating little things that happen. My middle name is Sheridan. Her married name was Mary Lynn Sheridan. She married someone with the last name that my adoptive parents gave me as my middle name. And we're still working on this, trying to figure out, because the Sheridan was a big family in Southern California. Somewhere there's a relationship. But my birth mother loved her. We talked every week. Actually, a couple times we would go back and forth. We'd spend Thanksgiving with them. We'd spend other holidays. She would come out. What was always really creepy is when she'd hang out with my mother. Remember, in our family, the rule is she who changes diapers gets to be mother. The other is birth mother. And you haven't lived till you come in the door and your 2 moms are sitting there. In this case, it's not like the 2 mom books you now find at the library. And they want to talk to you about something. And you're going, oh, I'm in trouble. What have I done? We think you should part your hair differently. That's what you've been talking about for 3 hours? But birth mother developed a very aggressive type of Alzheimer's, actually in her late 50s. And the Lord actually does some fascinating things. I was sitting down with her, and my mom had sent her all these baby photos of me. So when I'd go to her house in Walnut, California, there'd be my half-sisters on the wall, and there'd be some of my baby photos. And in her mind, that heartbreak, those years, she would actually talk to me about experiences she had with me as a child. And it was fascinating. And my sisters would say it was the best thing that ever happened to her because she always sort of felt like she had a little bit of a cloud over her soul. And knowing that I was okay, knowing that I'd had this really neat life and was going to continue to, had brought her this amazing joy. But the other thing it did is she actually would go out and, is the proper term, evangelize at different groups, talking about her experience of being there in the car with 2 of her best friends driving to Tijuana to go have an abortion, and how she started to choke up and choke up and choke up as she got closer to the border, and the crying, and her friends actually thought she was going to hyperventilate, and they basically stopped the car, turned around, and went back to her mom. And I actually met this last Friday at my birth mother's funeral one of those best friends who was in the car with her. And she and I are sitting on a bench outside the church, and she's retelling me part of the story. You sometimes realize how incredibly lucky we are. So how do you get up in front of an audience and say, let me explain to you why I'm pro-life? And in my case, I have a personal story. I get to tell the story of being born in that unwed mother's home and having met my birth mother and actually met my birth father. Can I take one sideways here? How many of you have ever done this, maybe when you were much younger, turn to your parents and say, I sure hope I'm adopted because I'm not going to be like you when I grow up? Sorry, you're in trouble. That whole nature versus nurture. I met my birth father about 10 years ago. And I knock on the door, and the door opens. And he's wearing the same tie as I'm wearing. He's wearing the same suit as I'm wearing. He's wearing the same shirt. I don't know if underwear, because we didn't get that far. But you start to go, oh, dear heaven, I'm looking at myself 18 years older. Yep. And seriously, he will call and leave me voicemails, and my wife gets it once in a while. I'm calling my own voicemail. We sound that much alike. So just as an aside, and here's what I beg of all of you. How many of you have an interest in running for office one day? Okay, all of you who just raised your hand, we should have a conversation of what it's going to do to your life. It's an honorable thing, but but even those of you who just want to be activists, are they called votes? I beg of you, be disciplined. Find a way to tell the story, whether it be personal or be in a loving fashion. Something is starting to happen out there in the collective consciousness where when I first ran for office back in the 80s, people like myself who were pro-life in an upper income Republican community, we were strange. You guys are some sort of religious activists. And the world is changing. We're starting to understand this is more than about a right to choose or a right to life. This is about what we are as humans. This is our humanity. We have to be loving. We have to be compassionate. But we also have to be sort of absolute in our belief systems and our faith. But I beg of you, those of you who are going to be involved in the fight and the cause and run for office, rehearse your language. Don't get pulled away. Don't get suckered into engaging in the fight on the other side's terms and language. You can persuade folks to understand this isn't about choice, not choice, convenience, not convenience. This is about what we are as God's children. This is what we are just being hominoids. It is what we are. Thank you.